Let's talk about watts, and do they matter when buying a new speaker system? If you're buying a passive speaker system, which means the amplifier is not built into the speaker, yes, watts do matter. Because if you are buying a 400 watt RMS speaker, you don't want to go out and buy a 100 watt amplifier to power it. You also need to look at ohms, but going into matching speakers and amps with a passive system is a topic for another video. If you are buying an active speaker system where the amp is built into the speaker, do watts matter there, which is what I'm focusing on with this video? The answer simply is no. Watts don't matter. They don't matter at all. I am quite positive with most speaker manufacturers, watts was an invention of the marketing department, not the engineering department. And the reason I say this is watt ratings have gotten crazy over the last like 10 years or so. When the first powered speakers came out, they touted 400 watts of power, which was, in line with the type of amp you would buy for a passive speaker. I bought the original Eon speakers, the passive ones, not the powered ones. I think they were like the Eon 1500 maybe. Could be completely wrong about that, but I bought those in the late 90s. And if I remember correctly, they were rated at 225 watts continuous, 450 watts peak. And I think like when the first Mackie SRM 450s came out, could be wrong about this because I'm just kind of spitballing numbers off the top of my head, but even the G2 Eons, I feel like they were rated at like 400 watts, which was basically in line with the passive counterpart to the speaker. But at some point, somebody threw 1,000 watts on their powered speaker. And when you walk into Guitar Center and you see giant 1,000 watts on the sticker on the front grill of a speaker, you're like, oh my god, 1,000 watts? It crushes my old speaker. So then Mackie comes out with the DLM series, like the DLM 8-inch speaker, 2,000 watts of power. I mean, just insane. I would love to see anyone put 2,000 watts into an 8-inch speaker, whether or not it's a coaxial driver. The Turbo Sound IQ12, 2,500 watt cabinet. And this is why I say watts don't matter. What it was 2,500 watts into a 12-inch cabinet. I would love to see anyone bypass the built-in amp, take an external 2,500 watt amplifier and put that into the system. I would love to see somebody do that, because the thing's going to start on fire. There's no way that speaker can handle 2,500 watts of power. And here's where we get into this weird marketing, oh, it really does put out 2,500 watts, is, okay, the speaker, the 12-inch driver, the compression driver, there is no way those can possibly handle 2,500 watts. Maybe, I mean, if we're really calculating it out, oh, it can handle it, what, for half of a nanosecond? And as far as the amp goes, you're telling me that's a 2,500 watt amp? Is that like 2,500 watt surge at also a half a millisecond? Half a nanosecond? I don't know, whatever's shorter. And is it calculated? Is it something that is theoretically possible that, well, we calculated this to possibly put out the output of 2,500 watts if it surged and needed it for some odd reason for a super split second? Or is it something that's actually been measured that it actually can put out 2,500 watts? Because that's the other thing. Some of this stuff is calculated mathematically, like, oh, it should theoretically be possible to do this, and some of it is actually measured. So then there's two different things there, and a lot of times I don't tell you whether it's measured or if it's just theoretically possible to do it. So if watts don't matter, what does matter when shopping for speakers? Well, if you're talking about loudness, how loud a speaker can get, Don't measure the watts, measure the SPL. So here's where it takes a little bit of digging sometimes, because a lot of times they don't slap SPL numbers on a big sticker on the speaker grill when you're shopping. The only speaker I've gotten recently that's done that is the RCF JMix 8. It's got a little cardboard sleeve that goes over the pole that's got a thing of stats, and it does say 128 dB on there. But you know, why does SPL matter? And why does watts not matter? And really, you just have to look at the pro-grade market. You know, I'm not only a DJ, I'm also a sound tech, and we do some national shows, production for national shows. And anytime I get forwarded a tech rider, there's always a section that says sound system. And under that sound system section, there's usually 2 points of data. Number one is the speaker manufacturers that they like to use. Usually you see, you know, JBL on there. Drawing a blank on a lot of the European brands. You know, sometimes you'll see Nexo. Usually, you know, you won't see DAS audio. Usually it's just kind of a wish list of what they would like to see, but the brand isn't so important. It always says 110 dB throughout the listening area. A sound system capable of producing 110 decibels throughout the listening area. Nowhere in there does it say we need a sound system that can consume 30,000 watts of power. Because if they did that, let me grab my calculator, 30,000 watts of power divided by 2,500 watts, whoops, 30,000 watts of power divided by 2,500 watts. Dude, I could just bring a dozen IQ12s. And the reason I say 30,000 watts of power is we have a dual 10 line array system, 12 boxes total, four dual 18 subs. It's the DAS Audio Event 210A system. We hang 6 boxes per side, center cluster 4 of the Event 218As, and we do crowds up to 2,500, 3,000 people with that system. And I think I calculated out the watts one time. I think it's only like 26,000 watts, something around there. So if you want to pit 12 IQ12s against my line array that has less watts, you know, I would definitely do that any day. But SPL is what matters, the decibel rating of your speaker. And some manufacturers will hide this. That's what I was saying earlier. Some manufacturers hide this. So on Mackie's site, they don't put the dB, the SPL rating, the decibel, they don't put it anywhere. You actually have to open up the manual and look at the technical information of the speaker to see that the DLM-8, which consumes 2,000 watts, puts out 125 dB. The DLM-12 puts out 128 dB. Now there's also one important bit of information, because I talked about measured and calculated earlier. Mackie provides max peak SPL ratings based on calculated data. They didn't actually measure it. What they did was they calculated the watt input along with the efficiency of the speaker driver, I believe. I don't know the calculation off the top of my head, but I've looked it up quite a few times. But you can calculate the output of a speaker without actually turning the thing on and testing it. And so that's what Mackie does. The IQ12 puts out 130 decibels, so it's a little louder for a 12-inch speaker. The JBL Eon 615 puts out 127. I can tell you right off the top of our head, our dual 10 line array cabinet puts 180 watts RMS into each 10-inch speaker and into the compression driver. That's the RMS rating on it, 360 peak, and it puts out 134 dB per cabinet. If you look at our Action 12A cabinets, they're rated at 131 decibels per cabinet. Now, one speaker I've really been wanting to try out is if you look at the new Yamaha DZR, that series. I mean, the SPL numbers are off the charts. Like, I think they have a 3-way cabinet, I think that's rated at like 143 dB. Don't quote me on that. Make sure you look it up. But it's 100. I think it's 143. Freaking loud. But so always look at the dB rating. But is that the only number you need to look at? No. The other thing you should be looking at is the coverage area, because they will vary from speaker to speaker. Now, a lot of speakers do the standard 60 by 90, 90 degrees wide, 60 degrees in the vertical. A lot of times they don't tell you exactly how the 60-degree vertical is. Sometimes it's slightly tipped down, sometimes it's not. That depends. Some speaker manufacturers put out very good detailed information about their speakers, some do not. The DLM series from Mackie is 90 degrees conical. I think I'm saying that wrong, but it is a coaxial speaker, which means the compression driver is in the center of the speaker. So I believe that one just goes 90 degrees everywhere, up, down, just giant circle, 90 degrees. And the reason that's important to know is because if you are in a room with, say, low ceilings, low, like maybe concrete or metal ceilings, like an old bar, if you're shooting 90 degrees in the vertical as well as 90 degrees wide, you're going to get a lot of reflection off the floor and off the ceiling, and that's just going to make it not sound as good. The goal when buying a speaker, especially when you're looking at dispersion, is you want to target your audience, not all the area where nobody is, because you're going to get, if you're not outside on every event, you're going to get reflections off walls. The IQ12s are 80 degrees horizontal, so a little bit narrower, by 60 degrees as well, but they also add another important piece of data. That 80 by 60 is at -6 dB. So as you get to the edge of that 80 degrees, the sound is actually starting to drop. So it's calculated out to 80 degrees, but at -6 decibels. So it's 6 degrees quieter on the edge of that 80 degrees as it is straight in front. And -6 maybe not at all frequencies, because some frequencies, as you start to hit lower frequencies, are a little bit more omnidirectional, not quite as focused. But I think for the most part the 80 by 60 targets the dispersion of the horn, not necessarily of the 12-inch driver. So just know those high frequencies are going to start to die down as you get closer to the edges of the coverage area. And if you've started to look at column arrays, some of those are very wide, which is kind of nice. If you're in a very skinny, narrow room, you're going to be shooting a lot of sound at the sidewalls. But at the same point, if you're doing sound for a band and you've got a 120 degree wide column array as the sound system, and you've got your speakers really far apart, maybe you don't need a front fill. We use a lot of front fills when we're doing really big stages where the speakers are really wide and apart. Sometimes you need 1, 2, 3 front fills just to make sure there's not a dead spot right in front of the stage. But if you have a speaker system that's super wide, you might not need 3. Maybe you'll just need 1 in the center instead of a full 3. Or if they're not super wide, you might not even need 1 at all if you've only got them 20 feet apart or so. So dispersion really matters. The other thing that matters is the frequency response of the speaker. Now, on a full range cabinet, I don't pay as much attention to it. A lot of the cabinets will be 40 to 50 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. And part of the reason I don't pay too much attention to that is if I'm doing a bigger event, that how high it goes is pretty standard at 18 to 20. On the lower end, if it gets down to 50 or so, that's fine for me. Maybe even 60, because it's usually only for smaller events that I don't bring a subwoofer. If you're doing a larger event, you're going to want to do a subwoofer anyways. But if you are looking at the frequency response, if you're not looking at buying a subwoofer, well, I should say, if you're not looking at buying a subwoofer, look at the frequency response. So like the IQ12, this gives an interesting two different measurements for the frequency range, or the frequency response. It gives a ±3 and a -10. So the -10 rating is what a lot of speaker manufacturers use. And it says it'll go down to 45 hertz at -10. Well, you know, to get to 45 hertz at -10, you're trailing off pretty good. And they say that roughly every 10 decibels is a doubling of sound. So you're figuring if it goes down to 45 hertz at -10, that where it's hitting 45 hertz is going to be at half the volume that the rest of the music is at. So you can pretty much figure that 45 hertz is going to be inaudible to anybody. It's not going to make a difference in the sound. Now at ±3, it does 52 to 18. And at ±3, all that's going to be audible. So that's one thing to look at in the frequency range, is if they do a plus and -3 rating or a -10 rating. For the most part, you're going to see -10 ratings because it sounds better to say it goes down to 45 than it goes down to 52. If you want to go one step deeper, and I do this mostly for subwoofers. I don't have any tech specs of subwoofers brought up on my computer, but I'm just going to point out, like, so our Action 218A subwoofer cabinets, they're rated to go down to 40 hertz at -10, and they do 140 decibels of sound. So one might think, oh, I'm going to get 140 dB at, you know, 40 hertz if you're just looking at the frequency response and the SPL. But really they're very punchy around like 80, 85, and then they kind of trail off in the low end. And obviously they hit that 40 at -10, which is half the volume that it's hitting 80. So what you really hear out of that speaker is a very just punchy, you know, 70, 80 hertz bass output. And if you go and scoop all that out, then you start to hear some of the lower frequencies, but then it does not hit 140 decibels. If you look at, I'm bringing up these Yamaha speakers because I'm pretty impressed with the output. I really want to actually buy a set so I can do a review on it to see if it's all it's cracked up to be with the specs. Because usually marketing around a speaker is, you know, really pushing it, and then you look at the specs and you're like, nah, looks like a regular speaker. But with the new Yamaha speakers that came out, I think it's the DXS 18 XLF. When you look at that one, I think it goes down to like 30 hertz at -10. But when you look at the frequency response chart, whereas my Action 218As are very punchy in the, you know, 70, 80 degree, or 70 to 80 hertz area, the Yamaha DXS 18 XLF, when you look at that one, it actually, so it starts to ramp up into the low frequencies, but it's between 50 and 60 hertz that the peak hits. So with that one, you're going to get definitely lower bass out of it. So if you're buying subwoofers, always look not just at the frequency range or the frequency response, but take a look at the chart and just kind of figure out what you're looking to do. If you're a DJ that DJs more hip-hop music, look at that frequency response chart and try to find a speaker that hits a little lower. You know, especially if you're playing hip-hop music with 808 drops, things that are really low, things that are rumbly. If you buy a speaker that hits hard at 70, 80, 90 hertz as a subwoofer, you're going to be pretty disappointed once you throw on a hip-hop song and you hear like a bass roll start to happen and then it just trails right off and it's gone. You want to get something that goes and you just hear the whole thing all the way down as the drop hits. So frequency response, frequency range is a good thing to look at. but also look at the chart. It's a little graph that'll show you where it hits and how loud at which frequencies. And those are really the things you need to look at. SPL, how loud is the speaker going to get? The dispersion. Now, subwoofers are omnidirectional, so there is no dispersion there. But if you're buying, full range cabinets, look at the dispersion. Is it covering the area you want it to cover? Is it covering too much? Or are you shooting sound everywhere? Like I would like to buy a column speaker, and I've been looking at the RCF NXL 24 versus the DB Technologies IG4T. Now, I kind of like the idea of the IG4T. The amp is way more technically advanced. The system's a lot lighter, 20 pounds lighter than the RCF. But and also if you take another cabinet, flip it upside down, and make a longer array with it, within the amp you can actually digitally steer the array. But the one thing that keeps me on edge about buying that one is the RCF is very targeted. I believe it's 110 wide and only 30 in the vertical. So it's made to just shoot right at the heads of your audience. The DB Technologies IG4T, I believe that's also right around 110, 120 degrees wide, but the vertical coverage is like 90, I think, 80 maybe. Like it's really high, like wide in the vertical. And I don't know if it has to be that wide in the high frequencies, like if only the lower frequencies are the ones to be able to be steered, and then just the high frequencies have to cover everything. I'm not sure. Like nobody ever puts that data behind why, So I just have to speculate. But if I'm only using 2 per side, I don't want my sound shooting at the ceiling. So that's one thing that steers me more towards the RCF. But I really like how the DB Technologies it's lighter weight, and it puts out 1 more dB of output. So just a little side note there, as I'm speaker shopping, I'm looking at dispersion on different speakers because I want it to be targeted straight to my audience. I want it to be able to cover the area I want it to cover, and I don't want it to be reflecting off every surface in a hall, especially if it's hard concrete floors, metal concrete walls, if it's metal or concrete roof. You don't want it to be bouncing off everywhere. It's going to sound echoey and not good. And we're going for clear and crisp when it comes to sound. And then of course, so SPL rating, coverage, dispersion pattern, and frequency response. But to take frequency response 1 step deeper, look at the frequency response chart. And normally you're going to have to look at these in-depth details. You're going to have to crack open the manual. Usually just go to the back of it and it'll have a rundown of the tech specs of the speaker. And you'll find from manufacturer to manufacturer, not everybody will have the same information. Not everybody will have the most detailed information. Some won't even have the graphs to show the frequency response. But if you have any questions, feel free to throw them down in the comments section. If you disagree with my saying that watts do not matter, go ahead and throw a link down to throwing a 3,000 watt amp or a 2,500 watt amp on an IQ12, and let's post a video and see the results. I'm not personally going to do it because I don't want to destroy a $700 speaker, but somebody else sure can. Until next time, have a good day.